So, okay, I've heard the criticism that you and others are profiting off of the distress of those people going through that really tough time. Like, do you ever worry about that?
So I started the first podcast back in 2012. It became a nonprofit in 2014. Been doing this essentially 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, last year the nonprofit raised $340,000.
Mm-hmm.
And you go like, oh, that's a ton of money, and it is, certainly is. But when we look at, we've got, I don't know what it is, 1,500 donators. And I think on average it's $100. And we got one donor who donates a significant amount, thousands and thousands of dollars. Huge supporter of our work. And then most of the other donors are donating $20 a year or something,
Hmm.
And they feel like they get value. They feel like not only are we helping them or have helped them, some folks are donating today because we helped them 5 years ago.
Right.
But the folks who are donating feel like we're helping them. And they also think it's important that there are voices who are intelligently criticizing this religion so that the next wave of people who wake up tomorrow will have access to this sort of information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it really does cost something to do this. You not only do you have all the normal kinds of overhead, but you have content creators who, if they're really good, you'll be lucky if they don't get some sort of financial benefit. You'll be lucky if they can go 3, 4, 5 years producing content without burning out and just throwing in the towel and walking away. So if you want folks who articulate ideas around Mormonism that are helpful to you and to the next wave of people, and you don't want those folks to burn out, then you have to essentially compensate them, right?
Right.
So as a nonprofit, what we do is we want to create good, high quality content that gives people the information and tools to be able to make new choices, having a more well-rounded information about the system that they're in. And so am I profiting off folks? To some extent, sure. In 2012, we lost money. 2013, I think we made just a little bit. Year after year, the nonprofit has grown. We certainly bring money in, but I think for what people are paying, again, $20 a year, $50 a year, $100 a year, and the value that they say they're getting, I don't know there's another way to do it. I mean, look at the podcasts that didn't do as well financially. Look at, again, I don't know what, like Gina Colvin or Dan Witherspoon or whatever, but you look at all the smaller podcasts that were out there on Mormonism over the last 10 years. Most of them last 6 months, a year. Some of them have 5 episodes and they quit.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's hard. Like you know this, it's hard to record something and then to edit it and then to promote it and then to think of the next idea and then to get it on paper and record it and edit it and promote it. You'll burn out eventually. I told you this at lunch a couple weeks ago.
Very possible.
Nobody does this for 10 years in this space and without being paid something.
Mm-hmm.
If you want this good quality content from good quality content creators, long run, again, anybody can do it for a year. Long run, you have to find a way to keep those folks from being burned out and to be excited about what they're doing. So yeah, I mean, we're a nonprofit. We operate on donations. We certainly bring in money. Is it priestcraft? Like, man, is it any more priestcraft than the Red Cross? The Red Cross goes out and does things that obviously are much more in tune with like human needs and suffering than what we're doing.
Yeah.
But really, you're taking money in and you're using that money to provide tools that help people.
Yeah.
It's the same concept.
There's certainly a parallel that could be made if we claim the church, when do the missionaries come in? When people are in a vulnerable state, right? And then that's when they get them. That's a criticism of the church. And there's certainly some parallels that can be made. But while you were talking, I thought of this. I had never thought of it before. I don't see people regretting donating to Mormon stories or to Mormon discussions. Um, I think that is probably, I mean, certainly at some point people go, I think I'm done with this. Maybe they have a change of heart and don't think it's even worth supporting anymore, and so they shut it off. But I don't know that they would, because that was my mindset when I've made donations. It's like I'm consuming this, I should give something back, right? Since I'm consuming it. So
the audio is
whether
free, right? Like, I'm not attaching
right, I'm
anybody's salvation.
saying the donations have come in because, I felt like I got something of value, right? I got something that I was consuming and using.
That's what I'm saying, though, is that folks aren't being told that their salvation is connected to whether they pay or not.
They can't, right? You
No,
can't see your kid
we
get
say,
married
look,
if you, right? Yeah, sure.
and we're up
Big
front. We
difference.
say, hey, we would like we're a nonprofit. We'd like donations so that we can compensate our podcasters, so that we can keep this quality content creation going.
Yeah, yeah.
And folks go, I want that. So I'm
Yeah.
going to send $20 in, and I want it to go to Where Will You Go? Or I want it to go to Mormonism Live.
Yeah.
Because they want to see Mormonism Live continue to produce content into the future. And so it feels like a genuine interaction where you're not making anybody do anything. And the content's free if they don't want to give.
That's right.
They can still listen.
Yep.
It'd be like if you could go to the temple whether you paid tithing or not.
Right. Which is right, not the case. So, okay, that's a good segue. I really do wonder, does the stuff that you're most proud of bring in the most donations, or is it the tribal stuff that brings in the most donations?
Yeah, so let's start here. I think the most important thing happening under our umbrella is Alan and Katie Mount in Marriage on a Tightrope. Because I think that is really rubber meets the road, two people who love each other and their marriage is at risk because they are holding different places in this religious paradigm. And they tend to bring in so much less than podcasts like Radio Free Mormon or Mormonism Live or Mormon Discussion. And I'm bothered by it. Right? Like, I'm happy for the ones that do well, but Marriage on a Tightrope seems like it really does benefit people at that really ground level. So in terms of like what stuff gets the most attention and whether that stuff's the most useful or helpful, I don't know that it always is. But people get the right to enjoy what they enjoy, and they get the right to give to what they give to.
Right.
And that's the way it works.
Well, do you ever worry about audience capture? Because that's kind of related, right? So if the thing that is giving you the money and you keep feeding that thing, even if it's not a good thing, like, is that, should we fight against that as content creators and say, you know what, I am going to do what is wise, not what is gratifying right now. Like, what's going to help the world down the road, not just what's going to help me right now.
Yeah, I don't make decisions based on what I think will get the most donations or what will get the most attention.
Maybe not consciously, right? Like, I mean,
I'm certainly making a catchy title on a promo image, right? Like, I certainly want to manipulate's a strong word, but I do want to nudge people into going like, oh, I think I should check that out when I maybe was on the fence whether I was going to or not.
Well, there's certainly titles. This is a little bit of a tangent. There's titles that you click on and you're like, this is not what you clickbaited me into. But there are others that are clickbaity, but you're glad you clicked on it, right? Like, it's close enough that it's not like false advertising. I know what you mean there. But that's not quite it. What I'm gonna let you go back. I've lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay. You asked like which work am I most proud of, and is it the stuff that gets the most attention. Almost Awakened brought in, I think, $7,000 or $8,000 last year, and it brought in $200 the year before. A big part of that is Britt Hartley coming on board and what she adds to that podcast. But
I've only listened to a few, and I like the direction that you guys go a lot.
Yeah,
it's
I'm really
that
proud
it's
of that. Like, I really enjoy that content. I hope to be able to continue to create that work regardless of how well it does. It isn't
right.
listened to at near the number that Mormonism Live is listened to, or Radio Free Mormon is listened to. And but it's the work that I feel like most would benefit people after they've done this deconstruction stuff to build a healthy life after.
Mhm.
And it's not the stuff that's most watched, but I spend as much time preparing that episode as I do preparing a Mormonism Live episode,
Mhm.
because I value it the same,
Okay, I
or
remember
more.
where I was going there. I've come back. It's come. So did you? Okay, subconsciously, I think things drive us. There's different things that drive us, right?
Yeah.
And I often wonder, okay, if one of the 12 apostles or one of the 15 had a faith crisis, would they even be able to, would that ever make it to their conscious awareness that they needed to step away? Like, I don't even, with all of the pieces pushing them to believe, I don't know that they even have the ability to do that. And I wouldn't even necessarily blame them or say that they have some kind of bad character even. It's just nearly impossible. And so, and that makes me wonder, like, okay, if your income is all coming in from this,
Mm.
like, what if you need to correct and you can't correct because of all of the factors that go into it? Does that Has that crossed your mind ever, or is this the first time?
No. No. The question certainly is, if there ever is a moment where this isn't the best place to spend my time or energy, or I'm not benefiting others, like, do I have the gumption to be able to step away from it?
Mhm.
And I've not really spent much time thinking that question out, only because there have been times where I've been burned out. Like, I thought I ran out of ideas, or
Mm.
it was taking. I was working a full time job back in Ohio for a floor covering store, and then I was working the podcast essentially as a second full time job, but not really getting paid to do it. Right, so I'm putting in 40 hours there. I'm putting 40 hours in my work, and it just became so much. I just was exhausted. And to be burned out from all of this stuff, there were moments where I was ready to walk away, but not because I didn't think it was helpful anymore. And so I'm at a point where I really feel energized. I keep a document now of, like, future episode ideas. It's a Google Sheets, so it's up on the cloud. Hopefully, the cloud always exists, right?
Right?
We think things like that, right? Oh, the cloud is forever. Well, let's fast forward 1,000 years, and I don't think Google Drive is existing.
Yeah.
But I now keep a list of, like, ideas as they come into my head, and I've got 100 for Mormonism Live.
Mhm.
And I think as long as there's something to be said that's useful. Again, I guess my point is that I haven't really thought your question through, because I feel like I'm years and years and years away from having to think that out.
Huh.
And the fact that I now do get paid, that we have a board of directors and they give me a salary, it now works to the point where, like, yeah, like, that pays the bills, as you pointed out. But it gives me the ability to not be so stressed working two jobs. I now get to sit here and run the nonprofit, the administrative side of things. That
Mhm.
takes its own time and energy. It's its own problem solving. And then I've got these shows every week that I do, that I sit and produce content for. And whether it's, when Britt Hartley does an Almost Awakened episode, she'll pick the topic, but she'll send me 2 or 3 podcasts to listen to. Or, hey, Bill, read this book before we have this conversation with this person. And so there's a lot of time spent getting ready for this stuff.
Mhm.
And I look at it, and I really feel like I've got 10 more years in this easy before I feel like I don't have something left to say. And I think when that time comes, then I'll have to sit with that question. Like, do I walk away? But then you have to say, like, what do you do? Like, you're right. Like, what do you do then? Do you invite someone else to come in and run this thing, or do you just let it dissolve and take that money and give it to some other charity that does good in the world?
Mhm.
But I think as long as we're producing content that we feel is helpful, that question just kind of sits on the back burner.
Yeah. Okay, similar note. You were saying that you're like an expert in Mormonism. Why not create Ryan, why not create a podcast that is like for profit then and just say, hey, you know what? We talk about Mormonism, the good, the bad, the ugly, instead of just mostly the ugly. Did you know what I mean? Like, why not make it just a place where people can still come and learn about all the things, but maybe in a less I, I keep the tribal keeps on coming to the word because I can't help but feel like there's like a flip that happens and all of a sudden you're resisting ex-Mormon subreddit, right? You're like, oh man, those guys are such assholes. And then all of a sudden you're like, man, they're not assholes, they're great.
Yeah.
Right? And so then something flips and then you're like kind of I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, instead of feeding that, like why not try to like produce all of it, like a whole I guess you kind of are by not you're not exactly doing it right, but you're allowing a lot under the umbrella to do it. So it's there, which I love that you're supporting that. But anyway, sorry.
No, I love it. Don't you think though, when you pretend to articulate a position that really isn't your true ground,
Yeah.
isn't that really not only uncomfortable but unpleasant?
Yes, but I would say that a lot of times I kind of hold both positions at the same time. Like sometimes I have like the skeptic point of view that's
Yeah.
always fighting what I kind of feel like I do believe. Like there's always that good argument on the other side that I'm like, you know what? They have a good point. I can at least bring that to light, like I can say, does that make sense? Like I would say that's how it works for me anyway. It's a lot easier when when I'm not quite decided to do that, so then I can genuinely do that. I'm not just pretending. Yeah, pretending's not cool.
And I'm to a point where to articulate the positives about Mormonism would be for me ignoring the elephant in the room. And
Well,
so
you wouldn't
I
even
can't.
have to do it. You wouldn't even have to only do the positive, right?
Yeah, but I think I think the harm and trauma being given to people in the form of unhealthy boundaries, in the form of sexual repression, for instance, in the form of infantilizing adults so that they stay at a 10-year-old level forever and learn the same. That changing isn't really seen as growth; it's seen as some sort of deviation from one's loyalty or testimony.
Mhm.
Um, I see so much negative things being handed out that I don't want to spend any time acknowledging Mormonism as like, oh, it's also a good thing. Like I don't have that space in me anymore. Like, yes, there are good things that happen there. There are benefits to people or to groups of people like a family.
Mhm.
And at the same time, there's so many things that aren't healthy and the leadership doesn't want to acknowledge it, that I feel my time is best spent shining a light on that. And I wouldn't feel good about sharing the good and framing it in any way that says like, hey, like there's a lot of good there. Maybe you should stay.
Hmm.
Not that I need people to leave, but I don't I until the negative is really acknowledged, right? Until that side of folks get to go like, hey, not only are we going to say we've made a few mistakes and leave it be, we're going to tell you that these are the mistakes we've made. And we're going to acknowledge that we've done some wrong, and we're going to commit to you that we're going to try to be better people and to get it more right. And until there's that kind of forthrightness, it feels inappropriate to acknowledge the good in a way that you make it safe for people to dismiss the unhealthiness that's there.
You would stop if what?
I would stop podcasting. Man, that's a big question. I would stop podcasting, number one, if all the things that I think do need to be said or put into the record are said. And I don't think that's done yet.
What that means, I guess.
What it means is that let's see if I can come up with an example of an episode. We did an episode, I think it was RFM who did the episode a few years ago, because we're always finding new things. So one of the episodes RFM did was the early journal of, let's see here. So in 2021, RFM does a podcast. I think we did something on Mormonism Live, and I think he did something on his own. And we talked about Joseph Knight Sr.'s journals. And there's missing pages at the front of it. And we suspect that there is an additional First Vision account, for instance. And so I think Mormonism is full of all this history, and there are still things uncovered. And I really do believe that, again, you can't ever get to a point where all the information's available. But I would like to suggest that when people are examining the truth claims of Mormonism, that they have access to all the information that is at that moment available. And in as much as there are new things to talk about, or things being discovered, or points of view that are enlightening to folks as they're wrestling with this stuff, I think as long as there's something to be said that fills in voids that we don't know, just as you earlier said, like, oh, I value learning, and I want to progress, and I want to get better at, doing this thing. I think this is part of that puzzle for folks who are trying to reconcile Mormonism. I think more information is good. I think there's been limited information in the past, and I think that has debilitated a human being's ability to navigate that in a balanced, fair way.
So I'd say that is perfection. That's when you'll stop?
No. If there are obvious places to still communicate about, to talk about issues, to kind of work out, like, what's the logic of this, or what's the rationale of that, or what's the repercussions of our theology here or there, I think as long as there's interesting things to be said, somebody's going to be saying them, and I really enjoy being one of the people who does that. So I think I would have to feel like I don't have anything new to add.
You don't, yeah.
Right.
Do you think that's a perspective thing, though? Like, if you have the perspective you have, you will always be able to find something, and it's not really.
I don't know. I've gone months.
To reality.
There was 1 year just before RFM joined us, right, just before Alan and Katie Mount joined us, where I had gone about a year producing almost nothing, 10 episodes or something for the whole year. And I was really at a point where I was really weighing, do I just stop doing this? So I think not having something to say is a big part of that. My health is a big part of that, right? If I was ever at a point where my health took a real serious turn for the worse, and for whatever reason, the time needed to do the research or the ability to talk into a microphone, lose your voice, for instance, right? Your vocal cords get damaged or something.
Yeah, that would be a problem for you.
So, yeah, I mean, the face is no big deal. I've got a face made for radio, so to record audio is not a problem. But health is a big deal. I think we'll always be helping people. So I have a hard time believing there'll be a day where emails don't come in and people aren't grateful. As I get older, I may not, there may be a generation of human beings I don't appeal to because I'm 75 years old or whatever, right? So maybe the audience number goes significantly down as I age, and but I think as long as I can do this and it is feasible, and there's something to say, and that people are being helped, I would like to be in this space. Part of it's donations too, right? If we hit a recession, which we sort of kind of are in, in the last quarter of the year last year, we saw donations start to go down a little bit. We had a better year than the year before, but donations in the last quarter were down a touch. And if we hit a depression, then people are gonna cut their donation. That'd be the first place people would go, like, hey, I've
Sure.
got to make sure there's food on the table. And so if there isn't funds here to pay the content creators, myself being one of them, then you're right back to the beginning phase of going like, oh, there's no financial benefit and I'm burned out. I've done this for 5 years. I've done this for 10 years. I don't know that I want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So there's those kinds of factors, but I don't really see me stepping away as long as I'm healthy and as long as I feel like there's something of value that I still have to say.
Well, that also makes me wonder too. You were talking about health. Do you ever feel like doing this all the time makes you stuck here? Like, we were talking about how people move on. They stay for a while and they probably move on. They probably is not healthy for them to like listen to this content forever. But what about you? Like, is it healthy for you to create this content the for so long, I guess?
I've
Or
got some non-member friends, and we had just gotten to know them, and I said, "Hey, why don't you come out with us to visit with our friends every month?" Our larger friend group puts together like on the third Friday of every month, we call it the Outer Darkness Drinking Club. And we go to a particular bar here in St. George. It's an old firehouse turned into a bar. And the bar has like 3 different levels in the
that'd be cool.
middle. In the middle of the 3 levels of the building is like all these nice, comfortable leather couches, and so we'll get all of our friends in there, and be 15 of us, 20 of us, 25 of us sitting in there, just kind of just talking. And so these new friends of ours that were never Mormon, I said, hey, would you guys like to go to this? And they said, oh, I don't know who's going to be there. And I said, well, it's a bunch of ex-Mormons. And they said, and I said, watch this. I'll make you a promise. I said, we'll go. They're all ex-Mormons, but I have a hunch that Mormonism won't be mentioned one time. And so I took them along, and we were there for 2-3 hours. Fun time. And Mormonism wasn't brought up once. And by that, what I mean is, whenever we meet somebody new in this space, Southern Utah, almost certainly the question of whether you're LDS, whether you were, all that comes up. And ex-Mormons do have this kind of initial trauma bonding over that journey, over that experience. It's a way to go like, oh, like you're like me. Here's how we're the same. But within a evening or two, that person, once they're hanging around that same group of people, they quickly transition to talking about other things. And so when we get together every month with our friends, Mormonism might be a giggle or a chuckle here or there as we're communicating something we remember about how things were. But almost
some
all
inside joke, right?
right, but almost all the conversation is like, what are you watching? What are you reading? What are you thinking about? What are you wrestling with? What's the challenges in your life? What's going really well? I don't feel like Mormonism is the thing that occupies my daily life.
Well, this is your
It
job.
does. It does. Well, it does. But yes, but the administrative side, I don't really have to think about Mormonism much as I'm
Huh.
doing that, right? And when I do the Almost Awakened podcast, I don't really have to think about Mormonism. It really is Mormonism Live, or every once in a while I'll come up with an idea to put another Mormon discussion episode out, like the one I did recently on tithing, where I tried to help people see the doctrine had changed over time.
Uh-huh.
And I'll get in that headspace for that. But the moment I step away from my computer, like I'm reading a book that has nothing to do with Mormonism. I'm a podcast junkie. I read
Yeah.
a ton of books, and none of the podcasts I listen to are Mormon.
Huh.
I don't listen to my stuff. I don't listen to any of the rest of the umbrella stuff other than a minute here or a minute there if somebody points me to something important that they're covering.
So now
Because
people understand why you let me on. Just kidding.
no, no. So first
I
off,
I
not
just
just you, but everybody in the umbrella, the comments you guys get are phenomenal. Like people seem to really enjoy the content you guys are creating.
yeah.
Mormonism is not my private life, but it is a part of my week. And I seem to connect with it when I need to, do the work. And then when I step away, I go back to doing things that have nothing to do with Mormonism.
Yeah. That's cool. I like how I've noticed the same thing. We've made some friends too. And I do think there's actually maybe a problem with that initial like trauma bonding And you do have to find something else in common in order to kind of like move past that. Because I think that makes you stay stuck sometimes too, if that's all you can talk about ever, right?
Yeah.
But we've made friends and create like our friends are really good at creating a place for other people to come that are fresh and they're willing to like do that. They're really awesome.
Right. Tell me your Mormon story. It's the first time I've met you.
Right.
Yeah.
But then we do things other than that setting, and it's just nice to have some friends that are also not in. I still have a lot of friends that are practicing Latter-day Saints, and it is still nice to have some that are kind of on the same page as you. So, I don't know. I enjoy having lots of different types of friends.
Yeah, the
But
diversity of that, right? Like people who have different life experiences and you get to kind of learn from that and they invite you to experience humanity differently because that's their experience. It's different than
right,
yours.
right. Well, I think one last question. It's kind of we're talking about friends anyway, and one of the things I like to focus on and talk about a lot is relationships. Like, how have your relationships been with any family or like you're a convert, so I don't know if you have any family that are even practicing Latter-day Saints, but do you have how have your relationships been? Are they any anyway? Do you have any
Yeah.
tips?
So I'm a convert, as you pointed out, as I've said earlier in the show. My mother's passed away. My father is still alive, doing well. I've got a brother. We're 4 years apart, but I have just one brother. I've got aunts and uncles and cousins that I feel emotionally close to, that I feel connection with. While I was in the church, those relationships struggled more.
Oh,
I
interesting.
was my being Mormon, I don't know, it made me distanced from my non-member family.
Well,
It,
okay. s- Did you have do you have tips for when the relationships were good during that time? Like I'm more interested just relationships across like different divides, period. So if like it's because you were a Mormon and they weren't, like were there things that helped? Or was it just that it didn't go well and you just accepted that? Or
it was because I was in this religion and my goal is to present this religion so well and to try to figure out how do I um, there's a certain bit of Mormonism that gets you to think you're better than everybody else, right?
Mhm.
You've got the truth. You've got the one true church. You've got the path to heaven. You're going to end up in the celestial kingdom with your
You feel
family
bad when other
forever.
people don't have it.
So there's a little bit of, and it's sort of subconscious, but there's a little bit of either judgment that causes some of that distance. And I think that, if you've got folks who are very different than you and your interest in life are not what their interests are, it's sometimes more difficult to connect. And when my family is all, drinking on the weekends and I'm the good Mormon, being in those spaces, again, the appearance of evil, like we're almost taught to leave some distance between us and the ones we love who don't follow the rules with us.
Sure.
And so as I left the church, um, my relationships with my in-laws became more strained and my relationships with my non-member family, my side of the family became much healthier. And so I went back to Ohio when my mom passed away and part of that whole experience. And when that was done, the funeral was over, we all got together, my side of the family, and all my aunts and uncles. My dad is one of 8 kids, and all of his siblings live in the same town pretty much. They're all within a half hour of each other, and they still hang out quite a bit. And I'm sitting there in this kind of grieving but celebration of my mom's life, and it's all my dad's side of the family. And the men and the women had equal value. Their point of view had equal value in the conversations, right? And and the in-laws and the biological children, so my dad and all of his siblings and then their spouses, like the spouses and the children of the family had equal value in their voices. And so there were ways in which I came back to my family and said like, oh, like all of these thoughts that I was better than them because I had the one true religion, I had been blind to the fact that they were actually doing human pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And then with my in-laws, like, I'm sure I said things the wrong way. Like, I was deconstructing our tribe, theirs and mine. I was deconstructing our tribe out loud to everyone, right? Like, I'm essentially putting my point of view out every week on a podcast, and people in my ward and my in-laws knew I was doing that. And it hurt them that this thing they love is the thing that I'm speaking out against every week.
Mm.
And so I'm just noting that it's interesting that on the front end, as a believer, certain relationships were strained and certain relationships did really well. And then on the outside, when you deconstructed and I stepped away, that kind of switched. And to recognize, like, relationships take so much to make them work. Like, it takes two sides that really want to put time, energy, and value in and hear each other and make space for each other. And I think sometimes when your beliefs are very different than someone else, it becomes an additional difficulty to make that work smoothly.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, advice, I don't know that I have any. Like, be good to people and make space for people to be them, but you don't have to align with anyone. Like, you get to be you.
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't suggest to anybody that they make sure that every relationship in their life always works 100% of the time forever, because that's maybe not what they want. But
and it's fine to take a break, right? Can't you take a break from a relationship, or even sever a relationship if someone cannot maintain healthy boundaries?
Well, and I would also say that, like, boundaries can change too. So you might need to set up a boundary now. Later, you grow a little bit and you can handle a little bit more, and so then the boundary comes down. Like,
Very true.
Yeah, things change, whatever. I wouldn't worry about making a mistake, because I think that it's okay to make mistakes and then figure out, oh, maybe I didn't really want to do that. Hey, never mind. Like,
right.
Yeah. Trying to trial and error is a good thing. I do think, though, if you're interested in maintaining a relationship, you said something there where it takes two people, and I really like a book called Feeling Good by David Burns, and he makes the case that it only takes one person. Assuming you want to have the relationship with the other person, there's obviously something there that you want. They're obviously somewhat of a good person, but it's a really, really good book. I accidentally read it because I was actually looking for Feeling Good, which is a more popular book that he wrote, but he also wrote this other one, and it was there, so I just decided to read it. And he makes the case that if you're interested, there are things that you can do. And I've implemented a lot of those tools, and what I found is that it's reciprocated almost all the time. So, and I love that. The reason I love the book is because it gave you power over your situation. It's like, if you want this relationship, it gave you the control to do it, and it didn't leave you just at the whim of the other person, or at the whim of, you have to, how do you word it? Some of the stuff is hard because you have to look in the mirror, and it's like, even if you feel like 90% of the problem is theirs and 10% is yours, like, fixing that 10% kind of sucks sometimes. So, anyway, I really like that book. I like the idea that, because there was a podcast, one of my episodes is a lot about this book. It's a presentation I did for the Good Book Club, and I was listening to a podcast that he did during that. Someone was asking him questions, and the interviewer that was asking the author questions said, "Hey, what if they really are an asshole?" And if you don't want to have the relationship, that's one thing, right? And that's okay. That's one of the answers. Like, if you don't want it, that's okay. But if you do want it, yeah, there's things you can do.
And for instance, if somebody wants to only be in space with you if they have more privilege, in the space, for instance. I've had family members who still want me to be judged by their Mormon rules, and they want to be able to out loud say things about whether I'm a good person or not based on whether I'm doing Mormonism anymore, right? And I don't want to be in that space. I don't want to deal with that sort of discrepancy of privilege where I have to sit quiet, but you get to tell folks that I'm an apostate, or I don't get to tell my story, but you get to tell yours, right? And so I certainly want to just value people who make decisions to step away from relationships because they're unhealthy, because they don't feel like they're beneficial to the degree of whatever harm or hurt or unnecessary discomfort you've got to feel. And again, we should all be okay getting a little uncomfortable. But I think sometimes in relationships, when one side is deconstructing and stepping away from the church, or doing some other hard thing, or living their life very differently than their family would like them to live it, I think there are times where it is, and I don't want to use the word create meaning, maybe a word I'm going too strong, but toxic, right? Where a relationship, somebody you love, but it isn't healthy for you to be in that close connection with them. And I think people have a right to set boundaries and to step away from that. So I agree with you that we ought to put maybe more effort in at times than we do, and that we shouldn't just write people off because it's hard or uncomfortable. And I also want to respect the other segment of people who really need the space to set boundaries and to put distance between them and the people they love, because there's such a discrepancy of privilege that it's just hurting too much.
Sure. And sure, each individual thing is its own case by case thing, and people have to figure that out for themselves. But I guess I just want to encourage people to be resilient too. And it's okay if you're going through a lot. I'm not trying to say that, I don't know. I realized in a lot of my relationships that maybe I was creating the toxicity, and it's okay to recognize that. And if you're getting, I've told this story a lot already, but there's times where I think as we leave, we want to prove that we were being the perfect Mormon, and the collapse of belief still happened to us. And we just want to prove ourselves. And I think that's what causes a lot of the problem, is a lot of times it's the person that left that brings up a lot of stuff. And
totally. I did that a bunch of times.
Yeah. And it's not even that that's wrong. But you have to remember, from their perspective, if you're being toxic to them, they're not going to be want to really be around you either. And them getting defensive makes sense. So I don't know. And also, sometimes people are so quick to throw away those relationships, and I can't help but feeling like that's like a cult thing to say, hey, it's okay, you don't need your family. It's like, no, you might need your family, actually. And so think long and hard if you're going to put a barrier between you and your immediate family. You can make new friends, but you can't make a new mom or dad, right? I've said that before, but I'm not saying that just because it's your mom and dad. There are actual toxic relationships, and that's a sticky subject, but I don't know. I feel like in the ex-Mormon space, people casually throw those relationships away too easy. Maybe that's just me being judgmental, and I'm wrong. I could be wrong.
No. I've had interactions with in-laws where I am vomiting all of this problem, right? All the problems of Mormonism, and I'm doing it in such a way that I'm probably screaming for someone that I love and care about to just say, hey, Bill, you're not crazy. This information is real, and it is problematic, and I value the time and energy and the wherewithal you spent to try to make sense of it. But what they hear when I'm typing that email out, what they hear when they read it is, I need you to know this church isn't true and you should leave, and whatever that message is.
Sure.
And so it does, again, we're using language and we're trying to be understood, and there's always misunderstanding. You're right. Like, they're taking a different message, at least in part, than what's intended. And to some degree, especially in that dark night of the soul, there's part of you that wants justification to see that, hey, like, I sent this to 10 people and they all left the church too. Right? Like, you want some vindication or validation that what you did was real.
Yep.
And again, I just think relationships are hard, and when two sides are so different on a really important thing, like, it's really important to me that you hear me that I don't believe this anymore and I don't think it's true. And the other side is, I need you to hear me. It's really important to me that this thing is true to me, and this is where my time and energy is best spent for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that conflict, that those two people arriving with such different beliefs, there's going to be no choice but to really bump into each other if both people are adamant that either I want to be able to say my piece, or I need us both to be quiet, or one of us gets to talk and the other one doesn't. All those kinds of dynamics will play out. So, right, you show up for Thanksgiving and your parents have this expectation that even though you're an adult, you're still my kid. And so you don't get to talk about the things that are on your mind because you're different, but I get to still tell you my church things, right? I still get to tell you about the talk I gave in church or the calling I did.
I see what you're saying, for sure.
Yeah. And I think when they feel like their story isn't valued and that the other story is being imposed on them, some folks will not feel safe to have that kind of relationship.
For sure. I think sometimes, I've been surprised though, sometimes I will say something that is going to, someone on a fly on the wall or whatever watching the conversation, it would make it obvious, like it's something that's important to me. It's like, oh, that's not a member of the church. And I think sometimes we don't allow ourselves to say things, but we'd be surprised if we did say them, if that makes sense. Like, we're not willing to rock the boat. And then sometimes we test the waters, and sometimes I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, I guess. And it's just something you have to test, I guess. But I don't know. I'm just thinking, I'm at a place right now with my family. They know where I'm at. They even know I have this podcast, and I've shared it with all of them, and none of them will watch it. But sometimes I walked in on my dad watching an episode once. It was the Jacob Hansen one. And he said I didn't let Jacob Hansen talk enough. He said I cut him off. But it's just funny because I've heard the opposite from other ex-Mormons that watch that. It's like, oh my gosh, he cut you off so much. And so it's interesting.
We all hear what
you want
to
listen to more.
The other thing too is people have personality differences. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram.
Yeah, you were talking about that. I haven't done it.
They have like 9 different categories of personality that you are separated into, right? You answer some questions and they decide somewhere between a 1 and a 9 what personality traits you have.
Uh-huh.
And I'm an 8. I'm a justice warrior, right? So if I see some injustice or something unfair, or the marginalized person's being picked on, I'm abrasive and I'm in your face.
Huh.
And other people are, and that's an 8, and other people are a 9 or a peacemaker. And they want to make sure that everybody's happy, everybody's good, everybody's content. And so the way we all value different things will deeply impact how we come to a conversation, how we come to a relationship.
Sure.
And if you value justice and the other person values being a peacemaker, and another person values, I don't know, someone wants to try new things and another person wants to stay at home and be safe all the time, right? Like, those kinds of value differences will also create their own conflict, both between, like, if we say, like, here's the right way human beings should handle this situation, going back to the morality question.
Yeah, maybe there's not one way.
There isn't, because if you value different things, there's no way you would see the conversation or the path to handle it the same.
Yeah. But there are definitely conversation tools, relationship tools that some work better than others.
Totally. And some tools worked on the first half of life and they don't anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess what I was getting at is, like, I feel like I can bring up some tough topics. It's just, it can't be every time. Like, so David Osler, when he wrote his book, and I think he pulled it from somewhere else, he was talking about like a 1-to-5 ratio. So like, and I, I, you have, sometimes you don't even see your family that often. And so if you're only seeing like once a month, maybe like, once every 6 months or so, you can throw them a curveball and it won't hurt. I don't think it hurts your relationship when it's that rate, So
Right.
anyways, but yeah, like I was saying, they all know that I'm doing what I'm doing. And my parents were nice enough to watch our kids when we were down in St. George and we were able to come see you. And when I got back, I was just brutally honest with them. I was like, "Oh, I was just talking to my boss, Bill Real," and I knew it made him uncomfortable.
Because they're familiar with who I am and what I do.
Well, they're familiar just because um, they'll watch a lot of stuff, especially my dad. In fact, I remember when I was still faithful, I walked in on my dad watching some anti-Mormon video. I'm like, "What are you doing, Dad?" My dad's always been willing to like uh, do stuff like that. Like, I don't know.
Explore the issues.
Yeah, but it's interesting. The house I grew up in wasn't what I became in through seminary and institute. Like, I feel like I became more orthodox through the training that I got from the church than from my home. My home was I don't know. My dad's pretty open-minded. I like my dad a lot. I learn a lot from him. But yeah. Anyways, it was a good conversation. So, and it's like way longer than I thought it was going to be. And we still didn't quite get everything, but I think we did. We did get to most of it. So, in one way or another. So, this is fun.
If I could say anything, just because you do tend to get people on both sides, and I think you do a really good job of creating sort of balance, even if not in one conversation, you balance it with a different conversation
Sure.
that hits it from a different angle and allows for the other side to have its side considered. It just strikes me that, folks on both sides listening, if I could say anything, it would be that every human is having a genuine human experience. And it's easy when people don't like the thing you think is beautiful to dismiss them on both sides. I think
Mhm.
ex-Mormons dismiss believers, and I think believers dismiss those who have lost their belief.
Yep.
And the reality is, and I think this has been your goal, and I think it's beautiful, but to help everybody recognize like their human experience is honest. It's not that Bill Reel is an evil supervillain who behind the scenes is just, so excited to work with Satan and try to get people out of the church. It's that Bill Reel had a human experience where he read and he thought about a lot of things, and some of those things couldn't, the more he looked at them, the more they couldn't make sense in his head. And that his integrity imposed that he had to let go of those beliefs and had to deal with his reality closer to what it was for him.
Mhm.
And he couldn't pretend to believe, and he couldn't choose to believe. Not that the church is true or not true,
Mhm.
only that it in his, inside my own head, I couldn't make it work anymore. And to honor that, like if somebody stays and they're sure the church is true, you got to respect that that's their human experience. And for those who believe and your friend is left, to recognize like they didn't just take an easy way out. It was a hard thing.
Yeah.
And using the labels that our system taught us of telling somebody that they lacked faith, or they didn't read scriptures enough, or they didn't say enough prayers, they didn't go to the temple enough. Like we have a whole laundry list of what they should have done. And the reality is if we just honor their experience as being genuine and that they arrived at what was the most rational conclusion for their brain,
Mhm.
and if both sides can kind of respect each other that way, at least the conversations I think will be healthier and more respectful and allow for more perspectives to be shared. And I don't think that's ever bad.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sometimes I don't know what the goal of my podcast is. It kind of is just what I'm interested in, but I do think it's maybe slightly legitimate to ask someone, "Hey, where are you going to go if you leave the church?" I mean, I played that clip of, I think it's Elder Ballard that said that in his conference talk in a
Yeah.
slight way of mocking him, right?
Yeah.
But because it sounds terrible, but when it really comes down to it, I think people do have to figure out where they're going to go, because I mean, when that takes up so much of your life, you have to figure out what to fill that with, and there's probably better or worse ways, and it is interesting to figure that out. What are people doing? So there's that aspect of it, and then I also do think yeah, things are pretty tribal around this topic, and I'm more interested in the conversations where people can figure out where to talk in the middle. That's more, just to me, that's more interesting. There's not that much of it going on, and so
There's not.
that's my
It's gotten
goal, I
worse.
guess. It
It's gotten
has.
worse, right? Like,
There's no current, like, you were talking about John Delen's earlier stuff. There's not that now going on.
No, it feels like the believers, because I think the critics are still willing to have those conversations, right? The people who have left, I'm more than willing to have Fiona Givens or Patrick Mason on the podcast. I don't think that goes both directions, but I think
Patrick Mason did come on recently.
It's a John Delen, I think, and did a conversation recently on there. But he hadn't engaged in a while, right? Like it was almost like he was going like, I'll try this again.
Yeah.
And to recognize that I think we all benefit when both sides sit down and talk amicably about the disagreement, right?
Oh, sorry, I was trying to cut this off, but now I have another question. Do you think
Please.
John Delen's moved, or do you think the Givens and Bushmans of the Mormon world have become more reserved on what's the word? Put barriers up?
I think critics, again, see this, I'm very jaded or biased. So my answer is going to be maybe even kind of bump into a believer's answer. But my answer is that when these conversations occur, I feel like on some level, Mormonism loses. And what I mean by that is that if we sit and have a conversation honestly, but if me and Terrell Givens sit down and we have a 10-hour conversation, and the critic is getting better at asking the logical questions to get it into the spot of the issue where the crux really is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if me and Terrell sit down and we talk for 6 hours and I'm really allowed to kind of poke at the logic of his answers, I feel like what ends up happening is, and Terrell will do fine, but the current Mormonism as constituted will get a black eye. Does that make sense? And so I think
I understand what you're saying. I don't know if I agree.
And by all means disagree. I think that the believers who are intelligently informed recognize that these conversations tend to lead to more people on the path to leaving. Yeah. And I don't think that goes both directions. So let me give you this for instance. Lots of people every day are learning the messy, complicated history and of the LDS Church and behavior of its leaders, to the point where people lose their faith and they step away.
I would say loyalty. You can lose your belief and still stay. It's when you lose your loyalty that really messes with you.
Yeah, and feeling like your leaders don't have your best interest at heart.
Well, they betrayed you, right? It's
Correct.
Like a relationship.
But I don't think it goes the other direction. So the folks who leave, having discovered it wasn't true, very few come back.
Feel reconciled by the apologetic.
Feel like, oh, I read more, I investigated it deeper. Mormonism is true again. I'm coming back. Not that it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But it's for every 100 who leave feeling like they learned that they were deceived, maybe 1/10 of a person comes back.
Yeah.
And because that goes just one direction, I think the defenders of the faith don't see as much value in the long form conversation of those kinds of podcast interviews.
No, I could definitely see how you could see it that way. I almost feel like you'd have to get into the intentions of the people that are maybe not having those conversations to really know the answer to that. It doesn't feel like a charitable explanation. I don't know. I heard Terrell Givens on the Comeback podcast. There's this new little podcast that popped up, and I was hearing him explain whether he's going to talk to people who are considering leaving, and he explained people have sometimes already made up their decision that they're going to leave, so what's the point of even talking to them? And I think there's some valid thing there. And it's like you said, we want to feel validated. So really what they want is to convince Terrell that the thing they did is right. And Terrell can't quite explain to them why he's staying, because it's just whatever thing they have a problem with, he doesn't have a problem with, and they can't make it his problem. And so it's just not going to be a fruitful conversation. And that's fair to not have a conversation if that's the point. I guess is kind of
yeah.
that makes sense to me.
I don't treat those conversations as if the agenda is that I'm going to change, say, Terrell's mind. He's going to change mine. Rather, I think that when we talk out loud,
he wasn't talking about talking to you or like
no, sure,
he was
sure.
talking about talking to an individual
who's losing faith in the church and seems
right.
like
So
they're on
this
the
would
way
have
out.
no public thing at all. He's just saying it's not even worth his time to talk to people who have already made their decision to leave.
Yeah,
and that's fair.
And I disagree in that when a believer who is informed sits down with someone who is either on their way out for sure or is out, and you have a conversation out loud, you now put out into the universe, you put a conversation that is acknowledging all sides of this messy issue, and you're poking holes in the logic of it. And the truth claims of any particular system or religion hinge on things adding up. And so I think when both sides have that conversation and both sides can think it's useless to talk to the other person, the reality is that there's 5,000 people or 10,000 people or 50,000 people who are listening to the conversation. So take, for instance, my conversation with Jim Bennett. Jim is a believer. He seems adamant that he's going to stay in. He's got certain kinds of answers for these questions. I'm out. I know the church isn't true. I've got my own paradigm. Neither one of us is going to convince the other. That's crystal clear through all 7 episodes, 14 hours of conversation. But what absolutely comes out of that is a whole collection of people listening, a whole audience of folks who are watching or listening to the audio or the video. And they are impacted by these arguments being worked out in real time. So when John DeLynn interviewed Richard Bushman or Terrell Givens, there was a chance to see Mormonism differently, see what parts held up, see where there were real complex problems that maybe didn't have good answers, see where the critic has a much stronger argument. And I think when people are allowed to work that out in real time by hearing 2 intelligent people from different perspectives do it in a long form conversation, I think there's room for people to be assisted into seeing the issues more clearly, and it benefits them in making their future decisions.
Yeah, that's true. And I hope I didn't take Terrell Givens, I didn't slaughter what he actually said on that podcast. I may have misrepresented what he said. But it was something along those lines of I don't think I can, if their intention is that they want to stay, I can help them figure out a way to stay, but I can't help them if they've already made up their mind to leave. And if it wasn't that he said, I think it was along that spirit.
What if someone says, my intention, again, we'll use Terrell as an example. My intention, Terrell, is to talk out loud with you about these issues for enough amount of time that you and I can walk out the logic of them, and we can see if this really does hold up. If it really does hold up in a way that really functions.
I think the best reason for staying is not I don't know how to explain this. I said this at an ex-Mormon get together and nobody liked it there, so probably nobody's gonna like it here, but I'm gonna say it anyway because that's what I think. I think the best argument for a Latter-day Saint belief is probably the best response to someone like you is that that's not the point. So it really doesn't matter. All your logic, all of your whatever, it just doesn't, that's not the point. And they hated that. I'm sure you hate that. I get it. I understand the other side of it too. I'm not trying to dismiss it. I really am not. And I don't think that people that say that are trying to dismiss it either. I think, you know, you talk about the later stages of life, right? Going through your second half of life or whatever. I think you can come to the same realizations that you have during a collapse of belief and realize that all those things that you were worried about don't matter. And you realize the point of church is something a little more along the lines of the wisdom stuff. And then that being that's the case, you're probably going to have a different view on some of the legalistic stuff about the church too. And you're going to have a healthier way of believing. Like, I think that really does happen for people. Um, so
I I think you're I
that
think
makes
you're
sense.
I think you're right that some people, for them, that's not the point. Like, they're there not because its truth claims are verifiable or true.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that there is a whole host of people who, as they learn that things are not what they were told, it absolutely is the point and it matters to them.
Right.
And I don't need or want to, or am I working to convince anyone who doesn't care, literally doesn't care if the church is true or not. I'm simply
But
trying to
there
be a
are, you're right.
voice. What's
There are
that?
people, you're right. There are people that are there that do care. And it changes their mind and how they act and they leave, like me. Like I am one of them. So it does
And
matter.
right, and to you, you would say, "I'm glad that somebody helped me see that this wasn't what it claimed to be, because now I feel empowered to make new decisions with my life, and I'm making them."
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the group I'm talking to. So the folks who listen that go like, "I know the church is true, I don't care what Bill Reel says." Great, like, that's cool.
I guess
But oh, go ahead.
I think there's a case to be made that you don't need it was James Randi for me and Penn and Teller and Jordan Peterson that helped me come to the conclusion. Like I think when people are being honest with themselves, they realize what they realize and they don't necessarily need someone to hold their hand out. I don't think people necessarily need that. Um, but
And maybe some do.
certainly is nice. It certainly
Yeah.
is nice to not feel crazy because that if I got anything from this kind of content, it was not feeling crazy. Which is also why I kind of want to help conservatives not feel crazy either because I think we're like a minority of a minority.
When you only understand,
Oh.
so in a structure where there are beliefs and there is opposition to those beliefs, if you're only exposed to the side of the argument that is in favor of what you believe,
Mhm.
you don't even know what you don't know. And it feels as though when people are given both sides of the story, that most people who take that quest seriously
Mhm.
seem to, wherever they arrive out, they seem to have valued that someone gave them both sides of the story.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I think the critics are willing to stay in that arena. Again, it won't always be polite, because me telling somebody in a conversation that really adamantly disagree with the logic of their argument, they may see that as a conversation that's not kind, and they may not want to be in it.
Hmm.
But I do think that two people who deeply disagree but are very informed, allowed to walk the logic of that out, I think there's no better conversation for people trying to figure out what's real, what's true, what's verifiable, what isn't. And then when you think of all the things that are attached to your beliefs, the things that were expected of you, and places where you didn't really get a chance to be your happiest, healthiest self, I think often knowing both sides of the story becomes empowering in 100 different ways.
Yeah, for sure. No, I get it. I
I
I
love
under
this pushback, by the way. Your questions are
I
incredible,
I understand. I get it because I was there and I made the decision because I learned the information. Like it's
and
not
you're
what I
grateful
thought
you
it was.
did.
Well, it's certainly certainly. But I don't know. If I'm being perfectly honest, I don't think that, I don't know how to word this. I mean, you go in a room of people that are outside of Utah, and the person that says, "Hey, I'm a believing member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint," they are the underdog in the room. And but I understand there's in people's lives it doesn't feel that way, and so sometimes they feel like they need to not feel like they're crazy, and I get that too.
But
So
Mormons aren't unique in that way, right? Like if again, I'm not debating. It's going to sound like I'm making Mormonism absurd. I'm only stating that statistically, the small minority of people believe it, right?
well,
So like a
no,
flat Earth.
no, I really do. Like when you go outside of Utah, and I think Latter-day Saints recognize this. They know that they're peculiar, and they're okay with it. Like I don't think it offends anybody to say, "Hey, you raise eyebrows when you say what you actually believe," and they're like, "Yep."
I think sometimes too, believers in any system start with an assumption that the non-believers are just less informed about
Yes,
if they knew what I knew, then they would
yes,
believe.
for sure.
In my
But
experience,
everyone is like that. I wouldn't say
yeah.
that is even in the religious paradigm. I would
No,
say
no,
that's
just any
anybody.
system of group belief of anything,
Yes. Well, any
you know?
belief. Like
Yeah,
if you knew what I knew, Bill Real, of course you would believe what I believed. If you had
right,
my experiences and my DNA, you probably would.
right. And my only point being is that I would caution anybody on the inside of any belief to also recognize that maybe the people outside actually know pieces of information that you don't know.
Sure.
So, for instance, I taught a non-credit class for seniors at the local university when I was in Ohio, Bowling Green State University, but it was their Fire Islands campus in Huron,
Mhm.
Ohio. And I taught on 2 different semesters. It was a 2-day thing on church history. Basically, it was like these seniors in the community wanted to learn new skills or learn new pieces of information, and I was offering a class on Mormon history, and 50 people signed up. And it became crystal clear right away that the missionaries in that knew significantly less than the non-members who came to learn more about Mormonism.
Oh, interesting.
It was also true that some of the people knew more about Mormonism than even another older gentleman or two that came with me to observe it, who had been in the church all their life.
What was the topic though? Because I'm
It
sure
was
it
it
wasn't
was
like
all of
every
church
topic.
history. So
Was
I
church
started
history
off with
the topic?
like essentially the first vision, and I worked myself up to the modern church.
Okay.
And then I did one on church history, and it was like 2 hours long, hour and a half, and then a break, and then another hour and a half or so. And
Okay.
then I came back the next week and taught on the doctrine of the church. Here's all the things that the church believes and the stuff it holds. The informed comments by people in that class about Mountain Meadows massacre, about First Vision accounts, like these non-members knew more about Mormonism than we believers generally give them credit for.
I see.
And so when somebody hasn't been a member of your faith and they're sharing with you that something doesn't feel right to them, instead of dismissing that, I'm simply saying that maybe they know things that you weren't allowed to know.
Mhm.
And that because maybe information was skewed for you towards the correlated believing faithful narrative, maybe when a non-member or an ex-member says something to you, maybe at least give the benefit of the doubt and go, what's the truth of that? And what and if that is true, what difference would that make? And why might it make a difference for them? Maybe it doesn't make a difference for me, but maybe it makes a difference for them that knowing, again, Joseph Smith married a 14-year-old. Maybe that's significant enough for them that they couldn't buy into this.
Sure.
Like their
Yeah.
argument is valid in their head, and it's not because they're uninformed or ignorant or deficient, but rather their brain legitimately tells them that all this information added up means there's just no way that this thing is what it claims.
Mhm.
And we can do the same thing in reverse too, right? Like we can go like their life experience is different. Maybe their spiritual experiences really are or were more powerful than the ones I had.
Mhm. Yeah. Thanks for going way longer.
This
than
was
I
fun.
said.
Just I hope some of this made sense. It felt like we were just wandering around. You'd ask good questions, and I'm
Did
kind of
wander
playing
around.
in the philosophical realm of it.
No,
And
I think
I
that
hope
was
people got something from it.
no, I think it went good. Appreciate it. It's been fun. I've been wanting to do this since I started the podcast, but I just once I got going, it's been really hard to it's been really hard to like focus. I've asked probably like 5 people out there to do interviews and then never followed up, and they probably are like, "What the heck?"
And now you're gonna get back to them.
Oh, I eventually will,
Yeah.
hopefully. So if anybody's listening to this and they're one of them, sorry, it's coming, maybe.
And when you put this
So
up, let me know. I'll engage with the folks who are listening. I mean, feel free to push back against anything I've said. I welcome that, and I'll watch when you release this, and I'll try to engage those folks who are putting up comments, good and bad. Good, pushing positively, affirming what I've said, or disagreeing with what I said. I'll engage that, and I'd
sure.
welcome that conversation. I hope that we can talk about things in a way that we both can understand each other better, which I think is the goal of your podcast, and I think you're
Well,
doing a great job of
I
it.
do have future projects that I wanna do, and I'm sure you'll be willing. I'd like to just like, for example, I would rather be a mediator and let someone else, present the faithful side or something, or
Yeah.
I would love to produce content like that. That's what I really, really craved a lot when I was going through my stuff, and there wasn't a lot of it. I could find old stuff on John DeLyn's channel, but there wasn't current stuff. Love the RFM Midnight Mormon debate. That was the highlight of my experience so far. So if I could do more stuff like that,
You
I'll
you
do it.
like you like that format?
No, I did not like that format.
Yeah. See,
But I liked that it happened. I was really proud of
yeah.
everyone. For everyone. I was proud of everyone for not letting it happen. So
Yeah.
anyway.
My only thing I would say to that is I think there are better ways to have more productive conversation, right? The
Yeah, for
debate
sure.
format. But I do think that if you can get people to do that, be a mediator. If you could be a mediator between Radio Free Mormon and Terrell Givens, or
It would be
Claudia
interesting, wouldn't
Bushman,
it?
and what's that?
That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
And allow them to say things, and you kind of hold it to some sort of
Do you
not
know what
letting it get
though?
off track or something.
I think what you're interested in is different than what I'm interested in. Like
Probably.
uh, I know the debate that you would like to see happen, or the conversation, the topics that would be
Yeah.
brought up. There's a big part of me that is just so uninterested in the does God exist or God not exist? And
Yeah.
all when you get into the fine print of like Joseph Smith, did he sleep with a 14-year-old or didn't he? Like, or was it just a betrothal? Is that still any better? Like that debate is uninteresting to me at this point where I'm at. I understand that it is interesting to other people though, so maybe it'd be worth trying to do those kinds of creations. But
It sounds like
anyways,
you're more of wanting to get, if you get two people who come out differently on the church, but figure out like what they value, and
yeah,
why they feel things are important, and
can
why they live
can
out the life the way they do.
yeah, can you get to the point of understanding each other? I'm more interested in trying to understand each other than trying to
Yeah.
uh and I just don't think you're gonna find understanding in those things. Either because
Yeah.
someone doesn't care or um yeah.
Yeah. See, I think if you can get understanding with each other, I think that's great. That's not my anti goal, right? Like
Right,
I would
right.
like to see that happen. I think that it's a win-win when two people come to the table and take the time to really steel man each other's positions and understand why they made the choices they did.
Mhm.
But my number one priority, and it has been for the entire decade I've done this, is to put out enough information that the people listening get to have a way to make better informed decisions.
Yeah. You don't think that stuff's already created? Or are you just afraid that it gets buried and then
Oh,
forgotten? Or
yeah, and I'm already finding that so much of what caught my eye 10 years ago isn't on the internet anymore. Doesn't exist.
is
Those
Mormon Think
people,
still around? Because that
they
was
they are.
probably one of the most helpful for me. Because
They
it was
are, but so many of these sites that carried this information the person either dies or they stop paying for the URL name or whatever, and suddenly it's just a dead link.
Interesting.
And so I think these conversations do have to be hashed out over and over again. The apologist says something like, hey, we've dealt with these before. Somebody's just throwing all these things against the wall. We've already answered all of these.
Yes.
And they have given answers to try to resolve all of them. And I think the problems are so in favor of the critic, at least in a large chunk of them, that it doesn't matter how many times you've offered a reconciliation, the reconciliation doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think these conversations have to be had over and over again. The Book of Abraham, I've heard that argument 1,000 times. And I think when RFM and I sat down and did a 3-part episode on the Book of Abraham, or when Robert Rittner comes on the scene and sits down with John DeLynn for 8 hours or 10 hours, I think those conversations reach people in a way that whatever previous conversations didn't.
Maybe.
And so I do think it has to keep being said.
Yeah. There's a part of me that wonders if, if there was that Mormon Think was just up there, and that might be enough too. Like, I'm not sure any convincing happened through watching content. I would think the thing that was solved was not feeling crazy, though. That was solved.
At some point, the problems became overwhelming. Again, for me, overwhelming that I just knew that it didn't add up.
Yeah.
In my head.
Yeah. Yep. That's why we're here. Being terrible apostates.
Lazy learner. Lazy learners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it wasn't that I didn't read enough.
Where will you go?
I'm going to get up tomorrow morning and drink my coffee. I'm going to work on producing more content. And I'm going to read or listen to something that enlightens my mind. And I'm going to connect with people that I care about and who care about me.
Yeah.
That's where I'm going.
That sounds good. Well, thanks, Bill. Thanks for being on. And hopefully everyone enjoyed this really long episode. Oops.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
Awesome.
Love it. Thank you.
Yep, thanks.